Welcome to West Film. We bring you the best movie recaps, reviews, ending explained videos, and hidden details from your favorite films. If you love great movies, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab some popcorn, and let's jump into today's movie. Ingrid Bergman would later win multiple Academy Awards and deliver acclaimed performances in films like Gaslight and Notorious, but Ilsa Lund remains one of her most iconic roles. The third point of the film's central love triangle is Victor Laszlo, played by Henreid, a heroic resistance leader. Henreid brought a sense of dignity and moral clarity to the role, offering a contrast to Rick's moral ambiguity. Before Casablanca, Henreid had appeared in several films but hadn't yet reached the same level of recognition as his co-stars. His performance required a delicate balance. Laszlo needed to come across as admirable without overshadowing Rick or losing the audience's sympathy. Henreid pulled this off by playing Laszlo as steadfast and principled rather than arrogant or self-righteous. His calm authority and unwavering commitment to the anti-fascist cause gave the character a symbolic weight that extended beyond the personal story. After Casablanca, Henreid enjoyed increased visibility and kept acting in Hollywood, though he never quite reached the lasting fame of Bogart or Bergman. Still, his role in the film remains a defining part of his career. Another standout performance comes from Claude as Captain Louis Renault. Rains was already a highly respected character actor known for his versatility and distinctive voice, having delivered memorable performances in films like The Invisible Man and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In Casablanca, Rains brought charm, wit, and moral ambiguity to Renault, creating one of the film's most memorable characters. Renault's shifting loyalties and ironic humor provided both comic relief and thematic depth. Rains' performance was key to making the character likable despite his opportunistic behavior, and his chemistry with Bogart added another layer to the film, culminating in one of cinema's most famous closing lines. The role only reinforced Rains' reputation as one of Hollywood's finest supporting actors. Conrad Veidt played Major Heinrich Strasser, the film's primary antagonist. Veidt had built a distinguished career in German cinema before fleeing Nazi Germany because of his opposition to the regime, and his casting added a layer of authenticity and personal significance to the film's portrayal of authoritarianism. Veidt brought a chilling authority to Strasser, embodying the menace of the Nazi regime without tipping into caricature. His performance stood in stark contrast to the more nuanced portrayals of the other characters, underscoring the ideological stakes of the story. Tragically, Veidt passed away shortly after the film's release, making his role in Casablanca one of his final and most enduring contributions to cinema. The supporting cast also deserves recognition, particularly Dooley Wilson as Sam the piano player. Although not a trained pianist, Wilson's performance here, especially his rendition of As Time Goes By, became one of the emotional anchors of the film. His presence added warmth and continuity, serving as a bridge between Rick's past and present. Few films in cinematic history have achieved the level of cultural penetration and historical importance of Casablanca. Released at the height of World War II, the film was more than entertainment. It became a reflection of global anxieties, moral dilemmas, and political realities. Over time, it transcended its original context to become a cornerstone of popular culture, influencing everything from language and storytelling conventions to political symbolism and artistic homage. At the time of its release in 1942, the world was engulfed in war. The United States had recently entered the conflict following the attack on Pearl Harbor, and audiences were grappling with uncertainty and fear. Casablanca resonated deeply because it addressed these emotions indirectly, through a personal story set against a geopolitical backdrop. The film's setting in French Morocco, a crossroads for refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe, mirrored real-world migration and displacement, giving the story an immediacy and relevance audiences could connect with right away. The character of Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart, became a symbolic stand-in for America's own reluctant entry into the war. At the start of the film, Rick is neutral, detached, and focused purely on self-preservation. By the end, he chooses to take a stand, sacrificing his personal happiness for a greater cause. This arc paralleled the United States' shift from isolationism to active involvement in World War II, making Rick's decision both a personal and a political statement. Similarly, Victor Laszlo, played by Paul Henreid, embodied the ideals of resistance and moral courage. His unwavering commitment to fighting fascism reflected the broader struggle against authoritarian regimes, and audiences of the time saw in Laszlo a figure of help and integrity that reinforced the film's alignment with Allied values. Meanwhile, Ilsa Lund, portrayed by Ingrid Bergman, represented the emotional cost of war, the personal sacrifices and impossible choices faced by people caught up in extraordinary circumstances. Beyond its immediate historical context, Casablanca has had an extraordinary impact on language and popular expression. Many of its lines have become embedded in everyday conversation, quoted even by people who've never seen the film. Phrases like "Here's looking at you, kid," "We'll always have Paris," and "This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship" have transcended their original scenes to become cultural shorthand for romance, nostalgia, and camaraderie. Even the frequently misquoted "Play It Again, Sam" has entered the lexicon, showing just how deeply the film has permeated collective memory. The film's influence extends into countless other works of media. It's been referenced, parodied, and reinterpreted across television, film, literature, and even advertising. Classic shows like The Simpsons and Friends have paid homage to its iconic scenes, often recreating the airport farewell or quoting its dialogue. Filmmakers have drawn inspiration from its themes of love and sacrifice, and from its blending of romance with political drama. One notable example of its cultural reach is Play It Again, Sam, directed by Herbert Ross and written by and starring Woody Allen. The title itself nods directly to Casablanca, and the film features an imagined version of Bogart, showing how the character had evolved into a mythic cultural icon beyond the original film. Casablanca has also influenced political and social discourse, often serving as a metaphor in discussions about moral responsibility during times of crisis. Rick's transformation is frequently cited in debates about when neutrality becomes complicity and when individuals or nations must take a stand, a relevance that has allowed the film to remain meaningful across very different historical periods, far beyond its original wartime context. The film's portrayal of refugees and displaced people has also taken on renewed significance in modern times. Scenes of crowded cafes filled with people seeking visas and safe passage resonate strongly in today's discussions about migration and humanitarian crises. This is part of what gives the film its lasting emotional power, even decades after its release. Stylistically, Casablanca helped define the tone and aesthetic of classic Hollywood storytelling. Its blend of romance, suspense, and political intrigue set a template many films have followed since. The archetype of the reluctant hero, the bittersweet love story, and the morally complex supporting cast all owe something to the film's narrative structure and character development. The movie also helped shape the mythology of Hollywood itself, demonstrating that a film could achieve greatness not through extravagant production or special effects, but through strong writing, compelling performances, and emotional authenticity. An influence still felt among filmmakers who aim to create timeless stories with limited resources. Another key part of its cultural impact is its association with nostalgia. For many viewers, Casablanca represents a golden age of cinema, a time when storytelling was driven by dialogue, character, and atmosphere. Its black and white cinematography, paired with its wartime setting, creates a sense of timelessness that continues to resonate across generations. In academic circles, Casablanca is frequently studied as an example of how film can intersect with history, politics, and culture, and it's often included in discussions of propaganda, national identity, and the role of art during conflict. Its layered narrative allows for multiple interpretations, making it a rich subject for analysis in film studies, history, and cultural theory. The creation of Casablanca is one of the most fascinating stories in Hollywood history, not because it was a perfectly planned masterpiece, but because it was anything but. Its enduring brilliance emerged from a chaotic, uncertain, and often improvised production process. Behind the polished final product lies a story full of last-minute decisions, creative tensions, and remarkable coincidences that ultimately contributed to its timeless quality. The film was directed by Michael Curtiz, a highly experienced filmmaker known for his efficiency and versatility. Curtiz had already directed numerous films across different genres, and his ability to manage large productions made him an ideal choice for Warner Brothers. Even so, Casablanca presented unique challenges. The script was incomplete when filming began, and major story elements including the ending were still undecided. This uncertainty forced Curtiz and the cast to adapt constantly, shaping scenes in real time as new pages of dialogue arrived. The screenplay was based on an unproduced stage play titled Everybody Comes to Rick's. The adaptation involved multiple writers, including Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, each contributing at different stages, often working independently. This fragmented process could easily have produced an inconsistent tone, but instead it created a layered narrative full of sharp dialogue and memorable moments, and it also explains why even the actors were unsure of their characters' ultimate fates during filming. One of the most famous behind-the-scenes stories involves Ingrid Bergman, who played Ilsa. Lund. Bergman reportedly kept asking Curtiz which man her character truly loved to recall as Laszlo so she could shape her performance accordingly. Curtiz apparently told her to play it down the middle, since he himself didn't yet know how the story would end. That ambiguity translated into a performance full of genuine emotional uncertainty, which became one of the film's defining strengths. Humphrey Bogart, who played Rick Blaine, was known for his professionalism as well as his reserved nature on set. Unlike his character, Bogart wasn't naturally cynical, yet he convincingly embodied Rick's detached demeanor. Interestingly, Bogart was shorter than Bergman, which created a visual challenge for the filmmakers. Creative camera angles, platform shoes, and careful blocking were all used to make Bogart appear taller in their shared scenes. The production took place entirely on sound stages at Warner Brothers Studios in Hollywood. Despite the film's Moroccan setting, the famous Rick's Cafe copyright Rican was a meticulously constructed set designed to evoke an exotic, cosmopolitan atmosphere. The attention to detail helped create a believable world. Even though the actors never left California during filming, a reliance on studios sets that was typical of the era but still required exceptional craftsmanship to pull off convincingly. One of the film's most iconic scenes, the airport farewell, was also a product of creative problem-solving brought on by budget constraints. The production couldn't afford a real airplane or a large outdoor set, so a small plane was used along with forced perspective techniques and strategically placed extras to create the illusion of depth. The fog filling the scene wasn't just an artistic choice, it was also a practical way to obscure limited set while enhancing the atmosphere. The result is one of the most memorable and visually striking endings in cinema history. Another compelling aspect of the production is the background of the supporting cast. Many of the actors were European refugees who had fled Nazi-occupied countries, which added a layer of authenticity to scenes depicting displaced people seeking escape. Their real-life experiences brought genuine emotional weight to moments like the singing of La Marseillaise, where the cast's patriotism is visibly evident. That scene in particular stands out as a powerful blend of fiction and reality, capturing the spirit of resistance against oppression. Claude, who played Captain Renault, was known for delivering his lines with wit and subtlety, and his performance benefited from the evolving script, since many of the character's most memorable lines were added late in production. His chemistry with Bogart developed naturally, adding to the film's dynamic interplay of cynicism and humor. The production wasn't without its challenges. Tight deadlines, budget limitations, and the pressures of wartime filmmaking created a demanding environment. Warner Brothers wanted to release the film quickly to capitalize on current events, particularly the Allied invasion of North Africa, which left little time for reshoots or extensive revisions and placed extra pressure on the cast and crew to deliver strong performances under less than ideal conditions. Despite these obstacles, the collaborative effort behind Casablanca resulted in a film that feels cohesive and deliberate, much of which can be credited to Curtiz's direction, which maintained a consistent tone and visual style even as the script kept evolving. His ability to balance romance, drama, and political tension kept the film's emotional focus intact. Music also played a significant role during production. As time goes by, performed by Dooley Wilson, was initially considered for replacement after filming. However, Bergman had already cut her hair for another role, making reshoots impossibly, so the original version of the song stayed in the film and went on to become one of its most iconic elements. That accidental decision is a good example of how many of the film's defining features were shaped by circumstance rather than intention. The narrative structure of Casablanca is often praised for its clarity, emotional depth, and near-perfect pacing. At its core, the film tells a story of love, sacrifice, and moral awakening set against the tense backdrop of World War II. What makes its storytelling so compelling is how it balances a deeply personal romantic conflict with broader political stakes, letting both elements enhance rather than overshadow each other. The film opens with a brief but effective sequence that establishes the geopolitical context through narration and visual montage. The audience learns about the flow of refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe, many of whom pass through Casablanca hoping to obtain exit visas to Lisbon and eventually the United States. This introduction immediately places the story within a world of urgency and desperation, where every character is driven by the need to escape or survive. From that global perspective, the narrative quickly narrows its focus to Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart. Rick owns Rick's Cafe copyright Riekn, a nightclub that serves as the central hub of the film. The Cafe copyright is more than just a setting, it's a microcosm of the world outside, filled with refugees, opportunistic officials, and resistance figures. Through the interactions that unfold there, the film introduces its key characters and establishes a tone of intrigue and moral ambiguity. Rick is initially presented as detached and cynical, claiming neutrality in all matters and refusing to take sides in the conflicts surrounding him. This sets up one of the film's central acts, Rick's transformation from self-interest to self-sacrifice. The pacing in this early section is deliberate, giving the audience time to understand Rick's personality and the world he operates in before the central conflict is introduced. The inciting incident occurs when Ugarte, a criminal, entrusts Rick with 2 valuable letters of transit that can guarantee safe passage out of Casablanca. These documents become the story's key plot device, driving much of the tension and conflict that follows. Their presence raises stakes that are both personal and political, as multiple characters seek to obtain them for different reasons. The story takes a dramatic turn with the arrival of Ilsa Lund, played by Ingrid Bergman, and her husband, Victor Laszlo, played by Paul Henreid. This moment marks the film's primary turning point, shifting the narrative from political intrigue to something deeply rooted in personal history. The revelation that Rick and Ilsa share a past introduces emotional stakes that complicate the existing plot. Flashbacks are a crucial part of the film's structure. Through scenes set in Paris, the audience learns about Rick and Ilsa's earlier romance, which ended abruptly when Ilsa left Rick without explanation. These flashbacks are informative as well as emotionally resonant, giving context to Rick's bitterness and Ilsa's inner conflict. By placing these scenes after the couple's reunion in Casablanca, the film lets the audience feel the same confusion and longing Rick does. As the story progresses, tension builds through a series of confrontations and moral dilemmas. Victor Laszlo seeks the letters of transit to continue his work as a resistance leader, while Ilsa struggles with her feelings for Rick. Meanwhile, Captain Renault, played by Claude, and Major Strasser, played by Conrad Veidt, represent opposing forces of authority and control. Each character's motivations intersect around the letters, creating a tightly woven narrative in which every decision carries real consequences. The middle section of the film is marked by escalating tension and shifting alliances. Rick's internal conflict grows more pronounced as he must choose between helping Laszlo and reclaiming his lost love. The pacing here works particularly well, interspersing moments of quiet emotional intensity with scenes of political intrigue and suspense, a balance that keeps the audience engaged while deepening the story's complexity. One of the most powerful scenes in this section is the confrontation between Rick and Ilsa in his apartment. Ilsa reveals why she left him in Paris. She believed her husband was dead, only to later discover he was alive and in danger. This revelation reframes what once looked like betrayal as an act of necessity and loyalty, and it becomes a critical turning point in Rick's emotional journey, forcing him to confront his lingering feelings and reassess his priorities. The climax takes place at the airport, where all the narrative threads converge. Rick devises a plan that resolves both the romantic and political conflicts in a moment of profound selflessness. He convinces Ilsa to leave with Laszlo, ensuring the resistance leader can continue his work. This decision represents the culmination of Rick's character arc, as he moves beyond personal desire to embrace a larger purpose. The airport scene is masterfully built, combining visual atmosphere with emotional intensity. Fog, lighting, and minimalist staging create a sense of isolation and inevitability. Every line of dialogue carries weight, and the pacing slows just enough for the audience to absorb the full significance of Rick's choice. The resolution is both satisfying and bittersweet. While Rick and Ilsa don't end up together, their parting is framed as an act of love rather than loss. Rick's final exchange with Captain Renault hints at a new beginning, suggesting his transformation is lasting rather than temporary. The famous closing line underscores a sense of continuity, leaving the audience with a feeling of hope despite the sacrifices made. Structurally, Casablanca follows a classic three-act format but distinguishes itself through its seamless integration of personal and political narratives. Each act builds on the one before it, maintaining steady momentum toward the climax while still allowing room for reflection and character development. The enduring power of Casablanca lies not only in its compelling story and unforgettable performances, but also in the depth of its themes and the richness of its symbolism. Beneath the surface of a wartime romance, the film explores profound ideas about love, sacrifice, morality, identity, and the tension between personal desire and collective responsibility. These themes are woven seamlessly into the narrative, supported by visual and narrative symbols that elevate the film into a work of lasting significance. One of the central themes is the conflict between love and sacrifice. The relationship between Rick Blaine and Ilsa Lund is a deeply personal love story ultimately overshadowed by larger moral obligations. Their romance, rekindled in Casablanca after their time in Paris, is intense and genuine, but the realities of war and Ilsa's commitment to her husband force both characters to confront the limits of personal happiness. Rick's decision to let Ilsa leave with Laszlo is one of the most iconic acts of sacrifice in cinema, showing that true love in this context isn't about possession, but about doing what's right for the greater good. This theme resonated strongly with wartime audiences, many of whom were making similar sacrifices in their own lives, and it gives the film a moral gravity that extends well beyond its romantic plot. Closely tied to this is the theme of moral awakening. At the start of the film, Rick presents himself as a man who sticks his neck out, cynical, detached, and seemingly indifferent to the political turmoil around him. As the story unfolds, though, it becomes clear that this attitude is a defense mechanism shaped by past pain and disillusionment. Through his interactions with Ilsa and Laszlo, Rick undergoes a transformation, rediscovering a sense of purpose and moral responsibility. Victor Laszlo serves as a symbolic figure of unwavering integrity and resistance. Unlike Rick, he's defined by his commitment to a cause greater than himself, representing moral clarity in a world full of ambiguity. His presence challenges Rick to reconsider his own values and ultimately inspires his transformation. In this way, Laszlo isn't just a character but a thematic counterbalance, embodying the values Rick must learn to embrace. Another significant theme is exile and displacement. The city of Casablanca itself functions as a symbol of transition to a place where people are neither home nor fully free. The characters who populate Rick's cafe copyright are refugees, each carrying their own story of loss and hope, reflecting the broader reality of World War II, during which millions were forced to flee their homes. The sense of impermanence and uncertainty running through the film adds emotional depth and reinforces its stakes. Symbolism plays a crucial role throughout. The letters of transit are one of the most prominent symbols, representing freedom, hope, and the possibility of escape while also carrying moral weight, since their use determines not just who survives, but who continues to fight for a greater cause. Rick holding the letters places him in a position of power and responsibility, forcing him to make a decision that reflects his values and priorities. Another key symbol is As Time Goes By, performed by Sam, played by Dooley Wilson. The song is a recurring motif connecting Rick and Ilsa's past with their present, representing memory, nostalgia, and the enduring nature of love. Every time it's played, it stirs up emotions tied to their time in Paris, reminding both the characters and the audience of what's been lost, while also underscoring the idea that some feelings stay constant even as circumstances change. The chess game Rick often plays alone is another subtle but meaningful symbol. It reflects his strategic mind and his tendency to treat life as a series of calculated moves. But it also highlights his isolation. As the story progresses and Rick becomes more emotionally engaged, the symbolism of the chessboard shifts, suggesting that life can't always be controlled or predicted. Lighting and visual composition also contribute to the film's symbolic language. Ilsa is frequently bathed in soft, glowing light, emphasizing her role as an almost idealized figure of love and memory. Rick, by contrast, is often shown in shadow, reflecting his inner conflict and moral ambiguity. The fog in the final airport scene is particularly significant, creating a sense of uncertainty and transition that mirrors the characters' emotional states and the ambiguity of their futures. The theme of neutrality versus engagement is another important thread. Rick's initial neutrality can be read as a critique of isolationism, particularly in the context of America's early stance in World War II, and his eventual decision to take action reflects the idea that neutrality in the face of injustice isn't sustainable. This gives the film a political dimension that complements its personal story. Humor and irony also reinforce the film's themes. Captain Renault, played by Claude, embodies moral ambiguity through witty, often ironic dialogue, operating in a gray area and shifting his allegiances based on convenience. Yet by the end of the film, even Renault shows signs of change, suggesting transformation is possible even for those who seem morally flexible. Ultimately, what gives Casablanca its lasting resonance is that it doesn't offer simple answers or clear lines between right and wrong. Instead, it presents a world where characters must navigate complex moral landscapes, making choices that define who they are. Through its exploration of love, sacrifice, and responsibility, the film speaks to universal human experiences that remain relevant across generations. The visual identity of Casablanca is one of the most defining elements of its enduring appeal. Even though it was made within the constraints of the Hollywood studio system, the film shows extraordinary craftsmanship in its cinematography, lighting, composition, and visual storytelling. Shot in black and white, it uses contrast, shadow, and framing not just for aesthetic beauty but to reinforce mood, character psychology, and thematic depth. The cinematography was led by Henreid, already known for his work on The Maltese Falcon, and his background in film noir techniques is clearly evident here. Even though Casablanca isn't strictly a noir film, Edson's use of high-contrast lighting, deep shadows, and carefully controlled highlights creates a visual language that heightens the story's emotional tension and moral ambiguity. One of the most striking aspects of the film's visual style is how lighting is used to define character. Rick Blaine is often shown partially in shadow, especially in the early scenes, a visual choice that reflects his emotional guardedness. The shadows across his face symbolize the moral gray area he inhabits, a man who claims neutrality but is clearly shaped by past pain and suppressed ideals. Ilsa Lund, by contrast, is frequently lit with a soft, diffused glow, with special attention given to Bergman's close-ups, using filters and lighting techniques that create a luminous, almost ethereal quality. This not only enhances her beauty but reinforces her symbolic role as a figure of love, memory, and emotional clarity. The visual contrast between Rick's shadowed appearance and Ilsa's radiant presence mirrors the tension between cynicism and hope running through the film. Rick's copyright recon is another key element of the film's visual design. The space is filled with layered composition, smoke, and movement, creating a sense of depth and complexity. The lighting inside the copyright is deliberately uneven, with pockets of brightness surrounded by darker areas, giving the space an atmosphere of intrigue and unpredictability that reflects the diverse and often conflicting motivations of the people who gather there. The smoke in particular adds texture, diffusing light and enhancing the sense of mystery. Camera placement and framing also play a crucial role in the storytelling. Director Michael Curtiz frequently uses medium shots and close-ups to emphasize character interactions and emotional nuance, relying on composition within the frame rather than elaborate camera movement. Characters are often positioned in ways that visually represent their relationships and power dynamics. Rick, for example, is frequently placed slightly apart from others, reinforcing his isolation, while scenes involving Ilsa and Laszlo often position them together to emphasize unity and shared purpose. The use of depth is especially notable, with foreground and background elements carefully arranged to create a sense of space and realism even within a studio set. Extras move naturally through scenes, and background details like musicians, waiters, and patrons add to the environment's authenticity, giving the world of Casablanca a lived-in, dynamic feel. One of the most iconic visual sequences in the film is the final airport scene. Because of budget limitations, the set was relatively small, but clever cinematographic techniques transformed it into a seemingly vast, atmospheric space. Fog is central to this effect, obscuring the background and creating an illusion of depth while adding a dreamlike quality to the scene. The lighting is soft yet directional, guiding the viewer's attention to the characters while maintaining an overall mood of uncertainty and transition. The fog also serves a symbolic purpose, visually representing the ambiguity of the characters' futures and the emotional haze surrounding their decisions as Rick and Ilsa say goodbye. The environment itself mirrors their state of mind, uncertain, obscured, yet full of meaning. The minimalist set, combined with strategic lighting and framing, keeps the focus on the emotional weight of the moment rather than on spectacle. Another important visual motif is the use of reflections and barriers. Windows, doorways, and other framing devices are frequently used to separate characters or emphasize emotional distance. Scenes where Rick observes others from afar, for instance, often include visual obstructions that reinforce his role as an outsider looking in. As his character evolves, these barriers become less pronounced, subtly signaling his growing engagement with the world around him. The film's black and white palette isn't all imitation but a strength. Without the distraction of color, the audience's attention is drawn to contrast, texture, and composition, with light and shadow becoming the primary tools for shaping mood and guiding emotional response. An approach that fits perfectly with the film's themes of moral ambiguity, where distinctions are rarely clear-cut. Costume design also contributes to the visual storytelling. Rick's white dinner jacket stands out against the copyright's darker tones, making him visually distinct while suggesting sophistication and detachment. Ilsa's elegant dresses, often in lighter tones, further set her apart from the world around her. These choices weren't incidental, they're carefully integrated into the film's overall aesthetic. The cinematography also makes effective use of stillness. Many of the film's most powerful moments occur in quiet, static shots where the absence of movement lets emotion take center stage, and close-ups are held just long enough to capture subtle shifts in expression, giving the audience time to connect with the characters on a deeper level. The emotional power of Casablanca isn't driven only by performances and visuals, so its masterful use of music and sound plays a crucial role too. The soundtrack and sound design shape the film's atmosphere, reinforce its themes, and guide the audience's emotional response. From its iconic songs to its subtle background scoring, Casablanca shows how audio can elevate storytelling into something deeply immersive and unforgettable. The score was composed by Max Steiner, one of the most influential composers in early Hollywood, known for pioneering the use of leitmotifs or recurring musical themes tied to specific characters, emotions, or ideas. In Casablanca, he uses this technique to weave together the film's emotional and narrative threads, making the music an integral part of the storytelling rather than just an accompaniment. At the heart of the soundtrack is As Time Goes By, performed by Dooley Wilson as Sam. The song functions as the emotional core of the film, symbolizing the enduring connection between Rick and Ilsa. Its melody is simple yet deeply evocative, and its lyrics reflect themes of love, memory, and the passage of time. Every time it plays, it stirs up a flood of emotion for both the characters and the audience. Part of why it works so well is that it's integrated into the narrative rather than imposed from outside. It exists within the world of the film as a performance in Rick's cafe. Copyright, making it a diegetic element that feels natural and organic while still carrying real emotional weight. When Ilsa requests the song, it becomes a pivotal moment that reconnects her with Rick's past and sets the unfolding drama in motion. Interestingly, Steiner initially wanted to replace As Time Goes By with an original composition he thought would better fit the score, but production constraints meant the song had to stay, and it ultimately became one of the most iconic pieces of music in film history, a decision born out of necessity that shows how some of the film's greatest strengths emerged unexpectedly. Beyond the central song, Steiner's orchestral score enhances the film's emotional landscape in more subtle ways. Romantic scenes between Rick and Ilsa are underscored by lush, sweeping melodies that reflect their unresolved feelings, while scenes involving tension or danger are supported by darker, more restrained musical cues that use slower registers and slower tempos to build suspense. One of the most powerful uses of music comes during the La Marseillaise scene, where Victor Laszlo leads a group of patrons in singing the French national anthem to drown out a group of German soldiers singing a patriotic song of their own. The moment is emotionally charged, not only because of its narrative significance but because of the authenticity brought by the cast, many of whom were real-life refugees. The swelling music, combined with visible emotion on the actors' faces, creates a moment of collective defiance and unity, showing how sound can function as a narrative turning point. The shift from one song to another represents a shift in power and morale, reinforcing the film's themes of solidarity and resistance. It's a clear example of music being used not just to set a mood, but to convey meaning and drive the story forward. The film's sound design, while less immediately noticeable than its music, is equally important. Dialogue is delivered with clarity and precision, letting the screenplay's sharp, memorable lines take center stage, and the actors' vocal performances are carefully modulated to match each scene's tone, whether it's the quiet intimacy of a romantic exchange or the heat of a confrontation. Ambient sound also contributes to the film's immersive quality. In Rick's cafe. Copyright, background noise like conversation, clinking glasses, and live music creates a sense of realism and liveliness, balanced carefully so it enriches the scene without drowning out the dialogue. The result is an environment that feels authentic and dynamic, pulling the audience into the world of the film. Silence is another powerful tool in Casablanca. Some of the most emotionally impactful moments occur when the music fades away entirely, leaving only the characters and their dialogue. An absence of sound that can heighten tension or emphasize the significance of a particular moment. In the final airport scene, for example, the interplay between music, dialogue, and silence creates a rhythm that mirrors the emotional intensity of Rick's decision. That sequence is a masterclass in sound design, the low hum of airplane engines, the distant echo of footsteps, and the enveloping silence of the fog combine to create a sense of isolation, while Steiner's score subtly rises and falls throughout, guiding the audience's emotions without overshadowing the dialogue. The balance between sound and silence ensures every word and gesture carries maximum impact. Another notable aspect of the film's audio design is its use of accents and multilingual dialogue. Characters speak in a variety of accents that reflect Casablanca's international setting, adding authenticity and reinforcing the theme of displacement as people from different backgrounds converge in a single location. That diversity of voices gives the film a rich auditory texture, making it feel like a true crossroads of cultures. The way Casablanca integrates music and narrative has influenced countless films that followed. Using a central musical theme to anchor a story has become standard practice in cinema, but few films have pulled it off as effectively as this. The seamless blending of diegetic and non-diegetic music makes the soundtrack feel like a natural extension of the story rather than something bolted on. When Casablanca was first released, it wasn't immediately regarded as the untouchable masterpiece it's considered today. It was certainly well received and successful, but its journey to becoming one of the most celebrated films in cinema history was gradual, shaped by evolving critical perspectives, audience appreciation, and historical context. Looking at its reception and criticism over time shows how the film grew from a strong studio production into a cultural landmark. At the time of its premiere in late 1942, the film benefited from its timely subject matter. World War II was ongoing, and audiences were highly receptive to stories that reflected their current reality. Critics generally responded positively, praising its performances, dialogue, and emotional impact. Still, it's worth noting that Casablanca was initially seen as one of many wartime dramas coming out of Hollywood rather than as a singular achievement. Contemporary reviews often highlighted the performances of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. Bogart's portrayal of Rick Blaine was seen as a departure from his earlier roles, showing a softer, more emotionally complex side, and critics appreciated how he balanced toughness with vulnerability to add depth to the character. Bergman, meanwhile, was widely admired for her beauty and expressive performance, though some early reviews noted that her character's motivations weren't always entirely clear, an observation that can likely be traced to the evolving script during production. The supporting cast also received praise, particularly Claude Rains as Captain Renault. His witty, nuanced performance stood out to critics, who often cited him as one of the film's highlights, and his ability to navigate the character's moral ambiguity with charm and humor contributed a great deal to the film's appeal. Paul Henreid was likewise recognized for bringing dignity and strength to Victor Laszlo, though some viewers found the character less dynamic compared to Rick. The screenplay was another focal point of critical attention. Written by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, it was praised for its sharp dialogue and memorable lines. Even at the time of its initial release, many reviewers recognized the quality of the writing, though few could have predicted just how iconic those lines would become. The blend of romance, humor, and political tension was seen as a strength, letting the film appeal to a wide audience. In terms of awards, Casablanca achieved significant recognition at the Academy Awards, winning 3 major Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director for Michael Curtiz, and Best Adapted Screenplay. These accolades helped solidify the film's reputation and boosted its visibility, Though even with these honors, it was still viewed at the time as part of a strong year for cinema rather than as an overwhelmingly dominant winner. Audience reception at the time was enthusiastic. Viewers connected with the film's emotional story and wartime themes, and it performed well at the box office. The combination of romance and political relevance made it accessible to a broad audience, from those seeking escapism to those looking for stories that reflected their own experiences. Its popularity led to re-releases in later years, each one introducing it to new audiences and reinforcing its status. Despite its success, Casablanca wasn't without its critics. Some early reviewers pointed out what they saw as inconsistencies in the plot, likely a result of the constantly changing script during production, while others felt the film relied too heavily on coincidence or that certain character decisions weren't fully justified. These criticisms, though, were relatively minor and did little to dent the film's overall positive reception. As time passed, critical opinion of Casablanca continued to evolve. By the 1950s and 1960s, the film was being re-evaluated in the context of film history, with critics and scholars increasingly recognizing its structural precision, thematic depth, and cultural significance. What was once seen as a well-made studio film came to be regarded as a near-perfect example of classical Hollywood storytelling. The rise of television also played a role in the film's growing reputation. Frequent broadcasts introduced Casablanca to new generations of viewers, many of whom embraced it as a classic, and this increased accessibility helped the film become deeply embedded in popular culture, further boosting its critical standing. In later decades, the film consistently appeared on lists of the greatest movies ever made. Institutions like the American Film Institute have ranked it among the top films in American cinema, often placing it near the very top. Critics praise its balance of entertainment and artistic merit, along with its ability to resonate across different eras. Modern criticism tends to focus on the film's timeless qualities. Scholars examine its themes of sacrifice, morality, and identity, as well as its reflection of wartime ideology, and some contemporary discussions explore its portrayal of gender roles and political dynamics, offering fresh perspectives on a film that's been studied extensively for decades. There have also been occasional debates about whether Casablanca is overrated, given its towering reputation, as some critics argue that its status as a perfect film can overshadow other equally deserving works. Even so, these critics often acknowledge the film's craftsmanship and influence, suggesting its enduring popularity isn't without justification. Another interesting aspect of its reception is how it's been embraced across different cultures and generations. While deeply rooted in the context of World War II, its themes are universal enough to resonate with audiences far removed from that era. An ability to transcend its original context, that's a key part of its lasting appeal. The legacy of Casablanca is one of the most powerful in the history of cinema. It isn't simply a film remembered fondly, it's a work that has actively shaped how movies are written, directed, performed, and even discussed. Its influence stretches across decades of filmmaking, affecting storytelling conventions, character archetypes, dialogue styles, and the very idea of what a classic film represents. One of the most significant parts of that legacy is how it redefined romantic storytelling in cinema. The relationship between Blaine and Ilsa Lund became a template for bittersweet romance. Instead of offering a traditional happy ending, the film embraced emotional sacrifice and moral choice over personal fulfillment, an idea that went on to influence countless later films exploring love as something complex, something that often requires loss rather than possession. The famous ending, where Rick chooses to let Ilsa leave with Victor Laszlo, became one of the most imitated and referenced conclusions in film history. The image of figures disappearing into fog on an airport runway has been echoed in countless movies and TV scenes, establishing a visual and emotional blueprint for farewell sequences that filmmakers still draw on today. Casablanca also helped establish the archetype of the reluctant hero. Rick begins the film as a cynical, detached figure who avoids involvement in political and moral struggles. By the end, He's someone who chooses responsibility over self-interest. This transformation has influenced countless characters in later films, from noir anti-heroes to modern action protagonists, cementing the idea that a flawed, disengaged individual can evolve into a figure of moral clarity as a central trope in storytelling. The film's dialogue has also had an extraordinary impact on popular culture. Lines like "We'll always have Paris," "Here's looking at you, kid," and "This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship" have become permanently embedded in cultural memory. Even people who've never seen the film recognize these phrases, which are constantly quoted, referenced, and reworked in new contexts, are a testament to how the screenplay, by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, achieved a rare kind of linguistic immortality. The film's influence runs deep in the language of cinema itself. Directors often cite its pacing, structure, and character development as foundational elements of classical Hollywood storytelling, and the way it weaves together romance, political tension, and personal transformation within a tightly structured narrative has become a model for screenwriting. Many film schools study Casablanca as an example of efficient, emotionally effective storytelling. Modern visual storytelling also owes a debt to the film. The work of director Michael Curtiz and cinematographer Arthur Ridson helped establish techniques for using lighting and composition to express emotion and theme, and the film's shadow-heavy framing influenced the development of film noir and later cinematic styles built around mood and atmosphere. The character of Captain Renault, played by Claude, also left a lasting mark on character writing. His morally flexible yet charming personality helped establish the likable opportunist archetype, characters who operate in grey moral areas but remain engaging and human, a type that's appeared again and again in later films and television. Beyond its influence on storytelling, the film has become a cultural symbol in its own right, often used as shorthand for classic Hollywood cinema, romantic sacrifice, and moral decision-making under pressure. References to Casablanca turn up in political speeches, academic writing, advertising, and entertainment media, showing just how wide-ranging its relevance is. Its legacy is also evident in how constantly it gets reinterpreted, and under-scenes from the film have been recreated in movies, animated series, and comedy sketches, and the airport farewell in particular has become one of the most parodied scenes in cinematic history. Far from being signs of diminishing importance, these references show how deeply the film is embedded in cultural consciousness. Another important part of its legacy is how it shaped audience expectations. Before Casablanca, films often prioritized clear resolutions and straightforward romantic endings. After Casablanca, audiences became more open to ambiguous endings and emotionally complex narratives, so the idea that a story could be both satisfying and bittersweet became far more widely accepted in mainstream cinema. The film also changed how wartime stories were told. Rather than focusing solely on battlefields or military strategy, it highlighted the human dimension of war, displacement, moral choice, and emotional sacrifice, paving the way for later films that explore war through personal narratives rather than purely historical events. The way audiences have responded to Casablanca over time reveals as much about changing cultural values as it does about the film itself. From its original wartime viewers to today's film students and casual audiences, Casablanca has continuously generated emotional reactions and personal interpretations that keep it alive as a living cultural experience rather than just a historical artifact. When the film was first released during World War II, audiences saw it through the immediate lens of global conflict. Many viewers were living through separation from loved ones, uncertain about the future, and feeling the moral pressure of wartime choices. For them, Rick Blaine's story wasn't abstract. His transformation from detachment to sacrifice reflected a reality many people were living themselves, and his final decision to let Ilsa go resonated as an emotional echo of wartime duty overriding personal desire. Ilsa Lund, meanwhile, became a figure of emotional identification for many viewers, who interpreted her choices through the lens of loyalty, grief, and survival. Her internal conflict between Rick and Victor Laszlo represented the impossible emotional decisions faced by people separated by war, and for many viewers of the 1940s, the film felt less like fiction and more like a reflection of their own emotional reality. Victor Laszlo, meanwhile, was often read as a symbol of hope and resistance. Audiences living under the shadow of fascism, or supporting the Allied cause, saw him as a representation of moral strength and collective struggle, and his unwavering commitment to a cause larger than himself offered a sense of direction during uncertain times. As decades passed, audience interpretation of Casablanca began to shift. By the 1950s and 1960s, viewers were no longer living under the immediate pressures of World War II, and instead encountered the film as a romantic classic and a symbol of Hollywood's golden age. Emotional focus shifted more heavily toward the love story between Rick and Ilsa, with many viewers emphasizing the idea of lost love and nostalgia, seeing the film as a meditation on what might have been, rather than what had to be. This nostalgic reading was reinforced by repeated television broadcasts, as Casablanca became a staple of late-night programming and film retrospectives. It reached audiences encountering it outside its original historical context, for whom the film often felt timeless rather than topical. Its black and white aesthetic, stylized dialogue, and classic performances all fed into a sense of cinematic nostalgia that transcended its wartime origins. Film students and scholars later approached Casablanca more analytically, examining its narrative structure, symbolism, and thematic complexity rather than focusing solely on emotional response. In academic settings, the film is often used to demonstrate how classical Hollywood storytelling functions, with students analyzing Rick's character arc, the use of recurring motifs like As Time Goes By, and the way political and personal narratives are woven together. Even in academic interpretation, though, emotional response remains central. Many viewers continue to report strong emotional reactions to the film's ending, particularly the airport farewell. The combination of sacrifice, unresolved romance, and moral clarity creates a powerful emotional experience that lands even with audiences who already know how it ends. The supporting character Captain Renault, played by Claude, is often interpreted differently depending on the viewer. Some see him purely as comic relief, enjoying his witty dialogue and ironic behavior. Others read him as a representation of moral flexibility in unstable political environments. This duality lets audiences engage with the character in multiple ways, reflecting their own views on authority and compromise. Modern audiences often view the film through contemporary lenses, including gender roles, political ethics, and historical representation. Some viewers scrutinize Ilsa's choices more closely, questioning the limits placed on her agency within the story. Others focus on the film's portrayal of refugees and displacement, drawing parallels to modern global migration issues. Despite these evolving interpretations, one thing has stayed consistent: viewers across generations continue to report being moved by the film's ending, even when they already understand its structure and historical context. The combination of music, performance, and visual storytelling creates an experience that remains emotionally effective regardless of familiarity. As Time Goes By, performed by Dooley Wilson, is often cited by audiences as one of the most emotionally powerful elements of the film. Many viewers associate it with memory, nostalgia, and lost love in their own lives, extending its meaning well beyond the narrative itself, so it becomes a personal emotional trigger as much as a cinematic device. International audiences have also contributed to the film's layered reception, since its themes are universal. Casablanca has been embraced across cultures and languages, and while some cultural nuances differ, the central ideas of sacrifice, love, and moral decision-making remain widely understood and appreciated. This global resonance has helped solidify its reputation as a universally meaningful film. In contemporary popular culture, audiences often engage with Casablanca in fragmented ways. Many people know iconic quotes, scenes, or references without ever having seen the full film are a kind of partial familiarity that shows just how deeply the film has been absorbed into cultural consciousness. Even without full context, its imagery and dialogue continue to evoke emotional recognition. The emotional strength of Casablanca comes from how its characters evolve under pressure. Rather than relying on action-driven change, the film builds transformation through dialogue, emotional conflict, and moral decision-making. Each major character follows a distinct arc reflecting the broader themes of love, sacrifice, and responsibility. At the center of the story is Blaine. Rick begins as a man defined by emotional withdrawal, running Rick's Cafe copyright Rican as a neutral space and claiming he won't take sides in political or personal conflicts. His early behavior are detachment, sarcasm, self-protection isn't simple indifference, it's a response to past heartbreak and disillusionment, particularly his unresolved relationship with Ilsa Lund. When Ilsa re-enters his life, Rick's emotional barriers begin to collapse. Her presence forces him to confront the past he's been avoiding, and he initially reacts with bitterness and anger to mask his vulnerability. As the story unfolds, though, it becomes clear that his cynicism is a shield rather than his true nature. Rick's transformation is gradual but profound. He moves from personal isolation to moral engagement, with the turning point coming when he chooses to help Victor Laszlo escape rather than pursue his own happiness with Ilsa. This decision marks a complete reversal of his earlier philosophy, and by the end of the film, Rick is no longer a passive observer but an active participant in shaping outcomes that extend beyond himself. Ilsa Lund's character arc is more internal and emotionally complex. She begins the story as a figure of mystery and emotional ambiguity, with her past with Rick revealed only in fragments, creating uncertainty about her true feelings. Ilsa is torn between her love for Rick and her duty to her husband, Victor Laszlo. Unlike Rick, her transformation isn't about changing beliefs but about accepting difficult truths. She has to reconcile her personal desires with moral responsibility, and her emotional struggle centers on loyalty, love, and sacrifice. Throughout the film, she tries to navigate these competing forces while maintaining dignity and compassion. In the end, Ilsa's arc resolves into acceptance. She agrees to leave with Laszlo, not because her feelings for Rick disappear, but because she recognizes the greater importance of his mission. Her decision reflects maturity and emotional strength, even though it comes at a personal cost. Victor Laszlo represents a different kind of character arc, one defined by consistency rather than transformation. From the beginning, he's established as a principled resistance leader committed to fighting oppression, and he doesn't waver in his beliefs even when faced with danger or uncertainty. His strength lies in his stability. Laszlo's role in the narrative is to serve as a moral anchor while Rick and Ilsa struggle with internal conflict. He stays focused on the larger cause. That said, his arc isn't entirely static. He adapts strategically, recognizing when others must make sacrifices to support his mission, and his calm acceptance of Rick's decision at the end reflects humility and understanding rather than ego. Captain Louis Renault, played by Claude, undergoes one of the most subtle yet meaningful transformations in the film. At the start, Renault is portrayed as opportunistic and self-serving, aligning himself with authority figures like Major Strasser not out of conviction but convenience. His behavior reflects a flexible morality. He's witty, charming, and corrupt in roughly equal measure. But his interactions with Rick gradually expose the limits of his neutrality, and as the story progresses, Renault becomes increasingly influenced by Rick's moral awakening. His final decision to join Rick and help Laszlo escape marks his own transformation, suggesting that even those who seem morally indifferent can choose a different path when confronted with genuine sacrifice and conviction. His closing line about rounding up the usual suspects signals not just humor but a new alignment of values. Supporting characters also add to the film's sense of emotional progression. Sam, played by Dooley Wilson, doesn't go through a traditional arc, but he serves as an emotional constant. His music connects past and present, reminding Rick of who he once was and what he's lost. One of the most important aspects of character development in Casablanca is how relationships drive change. Rick and Ilsa's history in Paris is essential to understanding their present behavior. Their past romance explains Rick's bitterness and Ilsa's emotional conflict, and without that shared history, their arcs would lack emotional weight. The structure of the film ties character development closely to narrative progression. Each major decision forces characters to reveal something about themselves, and the dialogue isn't just conversational but transformative, pushing characters toward change or resolution. The visual identity of Casablanca is strongly shaped by its costume and set design, both of which play a crucial role in establishing character identity, social hierarchy, and emotional tone. Even though the film was produced within the controlled environment of a Hollywood studio, its design elements create a convincing sense of place and time while also reinforcing the psychological depth of its characters. The costume design was led by the Warner Brothers wardrobe department, which specialized in elegant, expressive clothing for classical Hollywood cinema. One of the most iconic costumes in the film is Rick Blaine's white dinner jacket, which stands out sharply against the darker, smoky environment of Rick's cafe. Copyright Am. Copyright Rick. That contrast isn't accidental. The light-colored jacket visually isolates Rick, reinforcing his position as someone central to the environment yet emotionally distant from it. His clothing also reflects his personality. The structured, formal wear suggests sophistication and control, while the simplicity of his overall wardrobe reflects his emotional restraint. Unlike other characters who change outfits depending on circumstance, Rick's consistent style reinforces his identity as someone resistant to change. At least at the start of the story, Ilsa Lund is dressed in elegant, refined costumes that emphasize softness and emotional depth. Her wardrobe consists of flowing dresses with clean lines and understated elegance, reflecting her character's duality of outward composure paired with internal emotional conflict. The soft fabrics and lighter tones often used in her costumes contrast with the darker, more structured environment around her, visually setting her apart as a figure of emotional clarity and vulnerability. Victor Laszlo is typically dressed in formal, restrained attire that emphasizes discipline and seriousness. His clothing is functional rather than expressive, reflecting his role as a resistance leader. Unlike Rick or Ilsa, Laszlo's wardrobe doesn't reflect emotional fluctuation. Instead, it reinforces his stability and unwavering commitment to his cause. Captain Renault is often seen in polished military uniforms symbolizing authority, but his relaxed posture and slightly disheveled appearance subtly undercut that authority. His costumes mirror his moral flexibility, are formally structured on the surface but loosely interpreted in practice. The set design of Rick's cafe. Copyright Am. Copyright Rick is one of the film's most important visual achievements. Built entirely on a sound stage, the cafe. Copyright was designed to feel like a bustling international hub. The space is layered with activity gambling tables, musicians, patrons from all kinds of backgrounds, constant movement creating a sense of realism and energy that makes the cafe. Copyright feel like a living ecosystem rather than a static set. Lighting plays a key role in enhancing this design. The cafe. Copyright is filled with a smoky atmosphere, soft shadows, and carefully placed highlights that create a sense of depth and complexity, letting different parts of the set feel active and visually distinct. The smoke in particular diffuses light and adds texture, giving the environment a slightly dreamlike quality. The set also reflects the film's themes of transience and displacement. Rick's cafe. Copyright isn't a home, it's a temporary space where people pass through on their way elsewhere, reinforced by the constant movement of extras and the presence of refugees seeking visas. The design supports the narrative idea that Casablanca is a place of waiting, uncertainty, and transition. The production design also carefully distinguishes between social and political spaces within the film. The cafe. Copyright represents a semi-neutral zone where different factions interact, while locations like police headquarters or German military offices are more rigid and structured, emphasizing authority and control, a contrast that helps visually reinforce the film's moral and political tensions. One of the most striking set pieces in the film is the airport sequence at the end. Because of budget limitations, the set was relatively small, but clever design choices transform it into a seemingly vast, atmospheric space. The runway itself is minimal, but fog and lighting create the illusion of distance and scale. The fog in the airport scene is one of the film's most important design elements, so it obscures the background, softens edges, and creates a sense of emotional ambiguity that mirrors the emotional state of the characters, particularly Rick, who's making a life-changing decision. The fog also isolates the characters, keeping the focus on their emotional exchange rather than on the physical environment. The airplane itself is another symbolic element, representing escape, transition, and the possibility of a new future, and its presence in the scene reinforces the stakes of the moment as the literal vehicle for Ilsa and Victor Laszlo's departure. The design of smaller spaces also contributes to character development. Rick's private office, for example, is more isolated and controlled than the main cafe copyright floor, serving as a space for private emotional confrontations, particularly between Rick and Ilsa. The contrast between public and private spaces helps structure the film's emotional rhythm. Another subtle but important design element is the use of barriers like windows, doors, and archways, which often separate characters visually within a frame, reinforcing emotional distance or conflict. As relationships evolve, these barriers are sometimes removed or minimized, reflecting changes in emotional connection. The screenplay of Casablanca is widely regarded as one of the greatest achievements in film writing, and not because it was carefully polished from start to finish, but because it was shaped under unusual production conditions that forced constant rewriting and adaptation. The result is a script that feels remarkably natural, sharp, and emotionally precise, even though it emerged from a fragmented, evolving process. The dialogue was written primarily by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, each contributing at different stages and often working on separate sections of the story. Despite this divided authorship, the final script achieves the consistent tone that blends romance, wit, tension, and political undertones into a seamless narrative voice. One of the script's most distinctive features is its economy. Nearly every line of dialogue serves multiple purposes at once, advancing the plot, revealing character, and reinforcing theme with very little wasted speech. Characters rarely say exactly what they mean, and much of the emotional weight is carried through implication rather than direct statement, giving the dialogue a sense of realism and depth. Rick Blaine is defined by some of the most memorable lines in cinema history. His speech is often dry, sarcastic, and emotionally guarded early in the film. His famous detachment shows up in his refusal to take sides or get involved in political struggles. Beneath the surface, though, the writing gradually reveals vulnerability, and his dialogue with Ilsa Lund shifts from bitterness to emotional honesty as the story progresses. The script is especially effective in its use of subtext. Many of the most powerful moments happen when characters avoid saying what they truly feel in the scenes between Rick and Ilsa. Their conversations are full of emotional tension that's never fully resolved through words alone. Instead, meaning comes through pauses, glances, and carefully chosen phrases, letting the audience read between the lines and engage more deeply with the characters' conflict. One of the most famous aspects of the script is its collection of lines that have entered popular culture. Phrases like "Here's looking at you, kid," "We'll always have Paris," and "Round up the usual suspects" are simple in structure but rich in emotional resonance, which is part of why they're so easy to remember and so widely quoted. Captain Renault's dialogue also contributes significantly to the film's tone. His lines are full of wit, irony, and subtle humor. He often expresses cynicism about corruption and morality, yet delivers it with charm rather than bitterness. That contrast makes his dialogue both entertaining and thematically rich. reflecting the film's broader exploration of moral ambiguity. The script also makes effective use of contrast between characters' speaking styles. Rick's terse, controlled dialogue stands in opposition to Laszlo's more formal, principled speech. Laszlo speaks with clarity and purpose, reflecting his role as a resistance leader, and this contrast helps define character identities without relying on extensive exposition. Another strength of the screenplay is how it weaves humor into serious situations. Even in tense moments, the dialogue often contains subtle humor or irony, which keeps the film from becoming overly heavy while also making its emotional moments hit harder. The humor feels natural, growing out of character rather than forced. The dialogue's structure also reflects the story's evolving emotional dynamics. Early conversations tend to be guarded and indirect, while later exchanges become more open and emotionally charged. By the final act, the dialogue turns minimalist, with silence and implication carrying much of the emotional weight to a progression that mirrors Rick's internal transformation from emotional detachment to moral clarity. The famous airport scene is a prime example of the screenplay's restraint. Rather than relying on long speeches, the dialogue is brief and purposeful, with nearly every word carrying emotional significance and much of the meaning communicated through what's left unsaid. That restraint heightens the emotional impact of Rick and Ilsa's farewell, making it one of the most powerful endings in film history. Another important aspect of the script is its ability to balance personal and political themes. Conversations often shift seamlessly between romantic tension and broader ideological concerns, giving the dialogue a layered quality that lets it operate on both an intimate and a global level at once. The marketing and promotion of Casablanca reflected the studio's system era of Hollywood, where films were promoted primarily through theatrical posters, newspaper advertising, radio mentions, and carefully coordinated releases rather than the modern digital campaigns we're used to today. Although the film is now seen as a timeless masterpiece, it was originally marketed as a prestigious but fairly conventional Warner Brothers romantic drama set against a wartime backdrop. At the time of its release, Warner Brothers leaned heavily on its stars as the film's main selling point. Promotional material featured Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman prominently, highlighting their romantic tension and emotional connection. Bogart was already gaining popularity as a leading man in crime dramas and war films, while Bergman was promoted as a rising international star known for elegance and emotional expressiveness. Their pairing was presented as a compelling romantic draw meant to bring audiences into theaters. The original theatrical posters for Casablanca typically focused on dramatic imagery rather than narrative complexity, often depicting Bogart and Bergman in close proximity, with secondary characters arranged around them to suggest intrigue and conflict. The design followed the conventions of the era: bold typography, painted illustrations, strong contrast to aiming to convey romance, danger, and an exotic wartime atmosphere in a single image. Unlike modern marketing, which often reveals detailed plot information, Casablanca's promotion kept much of the story hidden, encouraging audiences to discover its emotional and political complexities through viewing rather than through previews. This was typical of the era and relied heavily on star power and genre appeal rather than narrative transparency. Radio was another important promotional tool. Short segments and advertisements were broadcast to promote the film's release in various cities, often emphasizing the romance between Rick and Ilsa while also highlighting the wartime setting. The combination of love story and political backdrop was presented as both entertaining and timely, appealing to audiences living through World War II. Newspaper advertising also played a major role in the film's early promotion. Full-page ads often ran in major urban newspapers, featuring dramatic taglines and stylized artwork that positioned the film as a must-see cinematic event. emphasizing its emotional intensity and relevance to contemporary global events. The messaging often suggested Casablanca was more than entertainment, it was a reflection of the world audiences were living in. The film's association with wartime themes also shaped its promotional framing, without explicitly presenting itself as propaganda. The marketing subtly aligned the story with Allied values like resistance, sacrifice, and moral clarity. Victor Laszlo was often highlighted as a symbol of heroic resistance, reinforcing the film's ideological alignment with the global conflict. Director Michael Curtiz wasn't typically a central figure in marketing campaigns of the time, but his reputation as a skilled studio director indirectly lent the film credibility. Warner Brothers often relied on its stable of experienced directors to reassure audiences of consistent quality, even when their names weren't prominently featured in promotional materials. Interestingly, Casablanca didn't receive an overwhelming promotional push compared to some other major releases of the time. It was seen as a strong studio picture, but not necessarily a landmark event during its initial rollout, and much of its long-term fame developed after release rather than being engineered through pre-release hype. A sharp contrast with modern blockbuster marketing, which leans heavily on anticipation and global campaigns. The film's success in theaters quickly amplified its visibility, though, and positive word of mouth played a significant role in sustaining audience interest. Viewers who were moved by the film often recommended it to others, helping it maintain steady attendance well beyond its initial release window. This organic growth in popularity contributed to its long-term cultural impact. As the film's reputation grew, Warner Brothers continued to re-promote it through re-releases and revival screenings, with later promotional efforts increasingly framing it as a classic rather than simply a contemporary drama. Marketing that shifted from selling the film as a new release to positioning it as an enduring piece of cinematic history. Television broadcasts in later decades also became an important form of indirect promotion. As Casablanca aired repeatedly on TV, it reached new audiences who hadn't experienced its original theatrical run, and these broadcasts helped solidify its reputation as a staple of classic film programming, introducing its iconic scenes to generation after generation of viewers. The film's most famous elements are the final airport farewell and As Time Goes By, performed by Dooley Wilson, became powerful marketing assets in their own right, reused over time in trailers, retrospectives, and anniversary promotions that kept reinforcing the film's emotional identity. The significance of Casablanca becomes even clearer when it's compared with other films of its era, similar genres, and the broader body of work produced by its creators. Through comparison, its unique balance of romance, political tension, and moral storytelling stands out as something rare even within the so-called golden age of Hollywood. One of the most direct comparisons is with other Humphrey Bogart films, particularly The Maltese Falcon, 1941. In that earlier film, Bogart plays Sam Spade, a character defined by suspicion, emotional detachment, and moral ambiguity. While Blaine shares some of these traits at the start of Casablanca, the key difference lies in character evolution, as Sam Spade remains essentially unchanged, operating within a cynical worldview, whereas Rick undergoes a complete moral transformation. This contrast shows how Casablanca takes the film noir archetype and reshapes it into a redemption narrative. Stylistically, both films use shadow-heavy cinematography and morally complex characters, but Casablanca softens noir's tone with romance and idealism. Where The Maltese Falcon ends in disillusionment and ambiguity, Casablanca concludes with sacrifice and emotional clarity, a difference that shows how the same actor and visual style can produce very different emotional outcomes. Another useful comparison is with romantic dramas of the same period. Many films of the early 1940s focus on love stories, but few combine romance with geopolitical stakes as effectively as Casablanca. The relationship between Rick and Ilsa Lund isn't isolated from the world around them, it's deeply embedded in the context of war, displacement, and moral responsibility. Many contemporary romantic films, by contrast, focus mainly on personal or social obstacles rather than global conflict. Films like Gone with the Wind, 1939, offer an interesting point of comparison as well. Both films feature sweeping romantic narratives set against historical backdrops, but their emotional structures differ significantly. Gone with the Wind emphasizes endurance and personal survival through changing circumstances, while Casablanca emphasizes sacrifice and moral choice over personal fulfillment. In one, love persists despite turmoil. In the other, love is willingly given up for a greater cause. Victor Laszlo can also be compared to other wartime hero figures in cinema. Unlike traditional action-oriented heroes, Laszlo is defined by restraint, intellect, and moral authority rather than physical presence. Here he doesn't dominate scenes through action, but through conviction and purpose. This sets him apart from more conventional heroic portrayals of the era, which often emphasized physical bravery over ideological strength. Comparing Casablanca to later films it influenced reveals even more about its legacy. Many modern romantic dramas and political thrillers borrow structural elements from it, particularly the idea of a love triangle embedded within a larger moral or political conflict. Few films, though, achieve the same balance of emotional intimacy and global stake. Ilsa later works often lean more heavily toward either romance or politics, while Casablanca maintains a rare equilibrium between the two. The film's dialogue style, written by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, also stands apart from other scripts of the time. Many films of the 1940s relied on more straightforward exposition and less stylized language, whereas Casablanca uses witty, layered dialogue that often carries multiple meanings at once.